Yes, looks good.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Welcome today, everybody. You are at the MS4 question and answer session number 2 on MCM5 post-construction stormwater management. My name is Cole Landgraf. I am the MS4 general permit writer in the municipal stormwater program at the MPCA. And again, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get into things, just some housekeeping notes as far as Microsoft Teams. We do ask that you please keep yourself muted today and your video feed turned off. And then when we do get to the Q&A session today, feel free to go ahead and use the chat feature to enter questions. You can use that at any point. And during the Q&A, if you would like to speak today, please use that hand emoji to raise your hand, and we'll go through the participant list and call on you, and you can go ahead at that point, unmute yourself and ask your question that way. So just a quick overview and a reminder, our session goals today are really to just provide kind of an overview of MCM5, answer any questions you may have related to MCM5. And really, these are all about helping MS4 permittees, helping you out there, making sure you understand the requirements. I do want to give a quick plug. We sent this out in one of the past emails about these sessions, but if anyone at a future topic would like to speak or maybe present or share some, maybe you have a story, maybe you have some success stories in particular, partnerships, things you're doing at the local level that you feel like maybe you have a strong program, maybe you have some challenges or barriers you overcame implementing your local program that you think other permittees would benefit hearing about, we'd love to have you present or share your story at a future topic. So I just ask that you consider that in the future if you see a topic that might be something you'd be willing to share with us in the future. So doesn't have to be anything super formal. You can have a PowerPoint, you don't have to have a PowerPoint, whatever it may be. Just something I ask that you consider. We do request too that you send questions beforehand to our MS4 permit program inbox there in the screen. It helps us kind of get a feel for kind of questions you want to know about. As much as I'd like to say we can answer every question you're going to have today on the spot, sometimes they take some internal discussion and deliberation on our end, and it's very helpful if we can review the questions at a time. So thank you to the one person out there, Jane, for sending questions ahead of time for this session. And maybe it's something to consider in the future, especially for next session. TMDLs is the next topic. Before I get into things today, I'm also going to ask that Dwayne give a quick permitting update. We will have a lead-off Mentimeter survey that Carly's going to give you to get familiar with that platform, as we will be asking some questions at the end. And then I will get in the MCM5 requirements and some available guidance that we have available out there on the topic. And then we have a significant amount of time reserved today for question and answer to hopefully get to any questions you might have out there thinking about MCM5 in particular. And then again, we're going to wrap up today. We have some questions related to MCM5, just some things we're curious about on your end, what you're doing out there before we wrap up things today. And we do have some questions too. We're interested to know, feedback on these sessions, if they're helpful, if they're not, anything we can do to improve them in the future. And we also want to know if there's any guidance out there that you'd like in particular on MCM5 that we could develop and make available on our website. So something to look at towards the end is complete that Mentimeter. Dwayne, would you like to chime in quick, give your quick permitting update?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. Dwayne Duncanson here, supervisor of the Municipal Stormwater Program. I just thought everybody would like to know where the MPCA stands in terms of issuing permit coverage under the recently reissued MS4 permit. Last month, for those of you who attended, I gave an update as well. We have made some excellent progress within the last 30 days. And so in short, we have public noticed and 100% of all applications that have come in, that's 247 applicants. We public notice 100% of those. They have all actually come off public notice. We have actually issued coverage to 244 of our 247 applicants. The remaining 3 will be reissued on or before, I believe it was December 1st. And so that's where we stand. We have really, for the most part, reached the end of this permitting process. And And so we will be moving on from there. And if you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer those. If not, then I will turn it back over to Cole.
All right, thanks, Dwayne. Yeah, feel free to ask questions in the chat. We can get to them during the Q&A as well. Carly, would you like to give the quick kind of warm-up Mentimeter questions for this morning?
Yeah, sure. So good morning, everyone. I'm Carly. I don't know if you guys saw in the chat, but I did post a couple different times on how to access the Mentimeter survey. So right now I'm gonna share my screen here and get that started. So hopefully you're seeing my screen. You can access Mentimeter. I posted how to access it in the chat, so just reference that. And I guess we'll just get started. Looks like everyone's finding it. We're getting people answering, so that's awesome. And like Cole mentioned, we will be using Mentimeter throughout today's session, so just keep the window open that you have it in now, and the questions will move along as I proceed with the presentation here. So just a little heads up. All right, I think I'm going to close it in about 30 seconds. So it looks like today we have the largest representation from cities, but it looks like we got people on here from the other organizations as well. So that's great. All right, I'm going to move on to the second question here. So how long have you been working with the MS4 permit? All right, great. I think I'm going to wrap it up here. It looks like we got everybody from every years of working with the MS4 permit, so that's awesome. That kind of concludes our session for questions this morning. So I'm going to turn it back over to Cole.
All right, thank you for that, Carly. I am taking back control here. All right, thank you, Dwayne and Carly, both for that update and the Mentimeter warm-up there. We will get into MCM5. So MCM5 is post-construction stormwater management. That is section 20 of the 2020 MS4 general permit. And if you boil down MCM5 to its basically simplest, what it's all about develop, implementing, and enforcing a program that prevents or reduces water pollution after construction activity is completed. What are the different components? How do you do that? What makes up the permit requirements for MCM5? First and foremost, you need to have a regulatory mechanism that establishes your legal basis, your regulatory basis for requiring those long-term BMPs after construction. You need to have a legal mechanism for the long-term maintenance of BMPs that have been implemented in MCM5 requirements, specifically those of your regulatory mechanism that you do not own or operate. You need to keep an inventory of BMPs that include that executed legal mechanism. You also need to have written site plan review procedures. You also need to have staff training, enforcement response procedures for following up when you find non-compliance related to your regulatory mechanisms. Keep documentation, and then also perform an annual assessment of your program. And I will go into each of these in the slides coming up here. So I include a reference in the top right of your screen. So if you do want to follow along in the permit, it is available there for you. First and foremost, like I said, you need to establish that foundation for your program, which we at the PCA believe is your regulatory mechanism. So the extent allowable under state or local law, you're required to develop, implement, and enforce a regulatory mechanism that includes items 20.4 through 20.15 of the MS4 general permit into your regulatory mechanism. For the purposes of this general permit, the MS4 general permit, a regulatory mechanism may make up a host of different things. Might be contract language, an ordinance, permits, standards, written policies, operational plans, legal agreements, or any other mechanism at the end of the day that you're able to enforce. You need to have that legal authority to enforce it. As long as you're able to enforce it, we would view that as a regulatory mechanism. Your regulatory mechanism also must require the submittal of site plans. You need to require that the owners of construction activity within your jurisdiction submit site plans with post-construction stormwater management BMPs designed with accepted engineering practices for your review and confirmation that the regulatory mechanism requirements have been met before the start of construction activity. In the new 2020 permit, we've also established a threshold for when treatment is required. So we require, as part of your regulatory mechanism, that you require owners of construction activity to treat the water quality volume on any project where the sum of the new and fully reconstructed impervious surface equals 1 or more acres. That's something in the 2013 permit, we really didn't have a clear threshold. In this one, it's all about based on impervious surface. We also have a calculation for construction activity, the water quality volume for construction activity, which excludes linear projects. Here, the water quality volume must be calculated as 1 inch times the sum of the new and the fully reconstructed impervious surface. And then the permit also establishes a separate water quality volume for linear projects. So for linear projects, the water quality volume must be calculated as the larger of 1 inch times the new impervious surface, or 1/2 inch times the sum of the new and fully reconstructed impervious surface. In the event you're able to treat the entire water quality volume within your existing right-of-way, you need to attempt to obtain additional right-of-way, easement, or other permission to try and get that full treatment. In the event you've explored your options, you're not able to get the full treatment for linear projects specifically, you're allowed to maximize treatment and get as much treatment as you can. If you have, let's say, a road redevelopment project, you're not able to get that full 1/2 inch of treatment after exploring, additional right of way. You can look to maximize. So maybe you're not going to get the full 1/2 inch, or maybe you're going to get a 1/4 inch, 1/10 of an inch, but you're going to try to get as much as possible near that goal. So it's important to know what the definition of fully reconstructed means, to know that when you have that trigger come into play for post-construction stormwater management BMPs. So what does fully reconstructed mean? It means where the impervious surfaces have been removed down to the underlying soils. It does not include things like structure renovation, mill and overlay projects, and other pavement rehabilitation projects that do not expose underlying soils. It also does not include maintenance activities such as utility, catch basin, pipe repair and replacement, lighting, and pedestrian ramp improvements. We also require that your regulatory mechanism first considers on-site volume reduction practices. This could be infiltration or a reuse system or a green roof, but we ask that you always explore on-site volume reduction practices first when designing the permanent stormwater treatment system. The MS4 general permit does not consider wet sedimentation basins and filtration systems as volume reduction practices. And in the event that infiltration is prohibited, you may consider other volume reduction practices other than infiltration. You may consider a wet sedimentation basin or a filtration basin. We also do have an off-ramp for instances where you're not able to cost effectively provide on-site treatment, and you may explore off-site treatment. So like I mentioned in the previous slide, there are certain conditions where we don't want you to allow for stormwater infiltration. We don't want stormwater infiltration in vehicle and fueling maintenance areas where you may mobilize high levels of contaminants in soil or groundwater, where soil infiltration rates are more than 8.3 inches per hour, where there's minimal separation from seasonally saturated soils or the top of bedrock, where there's predominantly clay soils, in certain drinking water supply management areas, particularly those in high and very high vulnerability areas, and within emergency response areas. Also within 1,000 feet up gradient or 100 feet down gradient of active karst features, and then in some areas that would receive runoff from entities regulated under NPDES for industrial stormwater. These are places like automobile scrap yards and hazardous waste facilities. We also have a requirement for off-site treatment for non-linear projects. When you can't, where the entire water quality volume cannot be cost-effectively treated on site, you must identify, or you may require the owners of construction activity to identify locations off-site where treatment projects can be completed. If the entire water quality volume is not addressed on the original site of construction activity, the remaining water quality volume must be addressed through off-site treatment and ensure the requirements of 2011 through 2014 are met. So first and foremost, we have a mitigation sequence. How do you determine, the best or most appropriate site for off-site treatment? So we require that you ensure off-site treatment projects are selected in the following order of preference. Highest preference for off-site treatment are locations that yield benefits to the same receiving water that receives runoff in the original construction activity. Next consideration would be the locations within the same DNR catchment area as the original construction activity. Next is locations in the next adjacent DNR catchment area upstream. And then finally, you may consider locations anywhere within your jurisdiction for offsite treatment projects. We also require NCM5 that offsite treatment projects involve the creation of a new structural stormwater BMP, the retrofit of an existing structural stormwater BMP, or the use of a properly designed regional structural stormwater BMP. And we do not accept, routine maintenance already required by the permit to meet this requirement. You have to retrofit or, create a new BMP or use that existing properly designed regional BMP. We also have a requirement that offsite treatment projects must be completed no later than 24 months after the start of original construction activity. But we do have with a caveat there. We do allow, in the event that you determine, we can't do within 24 months of the project starting, you are allowed to provide the reasons and the schedule for completing the offsite treatment project in the MS4 annual report. This was something during the public notice process of the 2020 permit. We did hear from a number of stakeholders that the 24-month timeline could be challenging in some instances, and some additional flexibility would make this option more attainable. We also allow for payment for offsite treatment. So in the event that you do receive payment from the owners of an owner of a construction activity for offsite treatment, you are required to apply that payment towards a public stormwater project. And you have to make sure that that project also complies with the requirements in the previous slides. So again, creating a new or retrofit BMP, making sure that those projects follow the mitigation sequence, and then also making sure that you complete the project within 24 months or document that reason and schedule for the project in the annual report. So many of you are probably well aware of this by now, but we do have an MCM5 compliance flowchart available on our website. Carly, maybe if you have it available, put that in the chat for folks. But this is kind of a nice 2-page document that breaks down when MCM5 requirements apply, which ones apply, and kind of follow the flow chart to make determinations on what applies and what considerations you can make along the way. So I highly recommend you take a look at that if you have not already. And this will be just a helpful tool to make sure you are meeting MCM5 requirements. So moving on from the kind of the regulatory mechanism, the standards portion, I guess I would say, we also require that you do establish a legal mechanism for the long-term maintenance of BMPs not owned or operated by the permittee. This is an existing requirement of the 2013 permit, but just want to again emphasize it again here, that you must make sure that you have this legal mechanism in place. This is generally going to be for those privately owned BMPs that were installed to meet your MCM5 regulatory mechanism requirements. This legal mechanism must allow you to conduct inspections of structural stormwater BMPs, perform maintenance, and assess costs for those structural stormwater BMPs when you determine the owner of that BMP has not ensured proper function. You must also preserve your right to ensure maintenance responsibility when responsibilities are legally transferred to another party, and you must protect and preserve those BMPs that were installed as a result of construction activity. In the event a structural stormwater BMP changes, causing decreased effectiveness, you must ensure that new, repaired, or improved structural stormwater BMPs must be implemented to provide equivalent treatment to the original BMP. The only really thing that changed as far as this requirement is we added that word repaired in the last bullet point, as that was not in the 2013 permit, but we agreed on comments that were made during the public comment period that if you can repair the BMP, you don't need to establish a new BMP in its place. So that was really the only word change as far as this requirement. Moving on, you are also expected to keep an inventory, a written or mapped inventory of all the different structural storm BMPs that meet the following criteria. So BMPs that have an executed legal mechanism, those long-term maintenance agreements in place, and the BMP was implemented on or after August 1st of 2013, need to be in this inventory. So these are specifically those permanent stormwater BMPs that were implemented to meet your MCM5 regulatory mechanism, keeping track of where those are located, written or mapped form. You're also expected to have site plan review procedures, implement implement written procedures for site plan reviews conducted by you before the start of construction activity, essentially to ensure compliance with the requirements of your own regulatory mechanism. What I'll comment on here is just make sure the procedures are reflective of your program. If that's a flow chart, if that's a decision tree, just make sure it's something that works for your organization. And make sure you're updating them periodically too. If things change over time, which that's kind of the goal with the MS4 permit, is that your program's not going to remain static. You're going to find efficiencies and more effective ways to do things over time. Just make sure you're keeping those procedures up to date. We also expect staff training. You're training individuals, making sure that they receive training commensurate with their responsibilities as they relate to your post-construction stormwater management program. And we identify individuals that are responsible for conducting site plan reviews or enforcement related to MCM5. And anyone that's been trained after that initial training, we do require in the permit that they receive some sort of a refresher training every 3 calendar years following their initial training. Enforcement response procedures. So the permit requires that you maintain written enforcement response procedures to compel compliance with your MCM5 regulatory mechanisms. At a minimum, require that your IRFs must include a description of the enforcement tools available to you and the guidelines for the use of each tool, and also identifying the name or position title of responsible people for conducting enforcement for your organization. And as far as MCM5 enforcement goes, it's probably going to be, what's your process for when you identify a failing permanent BMP for enforcing that long-term legal mechanism, or in the event that you've approved or confirmed a site plan met your regulatory mechanisms, you discover after the fact that that's not what got installed. Something that you identified as the BMP is something changed. It's not as effective as you thought. What's your process for compelling compliance through your regulatory mechanism? Documentation. So documentation, we have documentation components for site plans, trainings, and enforcement conducted. So first and foremost, whenever you conduct a site plan review, we want you to maintain supporting documentation used to determine compliance with MCM5, including any calculations you made for the permanent stormwater treatment system, the water quality volume that we treated through volume reduction practices compared to the total water quality volume required to be treated, documentation associated with any off-site treatment projects that you authorized, including rationale to support the location of the permanent stormwater treatment projects, any payments received and used for a public stormwater project, as well as all legal mechanisms drafted, those long-term maintenance agreements, including dates and the responsible parties involved in those. We also expect that you keep documentation of any trainings that staff attend, including topic matter covered, names of those individuals, their department within your program or within your organization, and the date of any events. And then finally, we also require that you document any sort of enforcement that you conduct related to MCM5, specific to your enforcement response procedures. This is, data discovery of the violations, who's responsible for the violation, any corrective actions or referrals to other organizations, and then also make sure you're keeping documentation or record when violations get resolved. And then finally, for MCM5, we also require that you conduct an annual assessment. So this is something that is a component of every MCM, and it's basically this idea that you are reflecting, you are looking back at your program to make sure you are meeting the permit requirements, and you're looking for avenues or ways that you can improve your program. We also require that, are you achieving those measurable requirements? Measurable requirements are activities that must be documented or tracked as appropriate to the MCM. So MCM5, it's going to be things like, do you have an updated inventory? Are you training the appropriate staff? Do you have the site plan review procedures in place and you're reviewing plans before construction activity begin? Performing inspections, for example, of long-term BMPs. Any enforcement conducted, making sure you're having an intentional opportunity every year to look back at your program and look if you're meeting permit requirements, and are there areas where you might be able to improve or make things more efficient or effective. And then finally, this component is required that you complete this assessment before you submit your annual report, and you also need to document any modifications you make to your program as a result of this assessment. So we do have some guidance available on MCM5. It's primarily available in the Minnesota Stormwater Manual, in the digital document library. Carly, maybe you can put it in the chat, the link. But if you just either go to the homepage of the Minnesota Stormwater Manual or Google MS4 DDL, it should be the first search result that comes up. You can go to that way. And if you go to MCM5, we do have some examples that MS4 permittees have generously shared as examples of different materials such as long-term maintenance agreements, ordinances, documentation, and different site plan review procedures. One thing to note here is this is something we do need to update over time. These materials available on here were originally reviewed under the 2013 MS4 general permit, and this is something we need to populate over time as we discover and permittees allow us to share some of their materials that we may discover over audits that we would like to post here and get up to date and up to speed with the 2020 MS4 general permit. A lot of the materials are still relevant for the 2020 MS4 general permit, but if you're confused or you want to double check, I highly recommend comparing any document you take from this site against the 2020 permit requirements. And also, if you're concerned, feel free to reach out to any of your assigned MS4 staff person, and they can definitely help you out and work with you to determine if that example document or material is sufficient under the 2020 MS4 general permit. So that is all I have. We can open it up for questions at this point.
Cole, there is one question in the chat. I guess we can start with if you want.
Yeah, go for it. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here so I can look at the chat. All right, let's see. Okay, so Greg Kimman, you had a question. Is there a definition for cost effectively treat? And the answer is no. That cost effective we did not define. We wanted to give permitting some flexibility as far as determining that. It's probably going to mean different things to different permittees. A watershed district in the metro area, for example, it might mean one thing where it might mean to another permittee something a little different. You have some ability to determine that. If you make a cost-effective determination, we want you to maintain documentation and why you made that decision you did. But this is a general permit, and we wanted to give, at least for this permit cycle, you know, a great deal of flexibility for permittees to make that determination. And while people are thinking of questions, maybe I'll go to some of the email questions.
Someone has their hand up, Cole.
Okay. We'll
Cole
go to that,
Johnson.
and then we'll go to. Go ahead, Cole.
Hey, Cole. So I just wanted to ask. It's kind of a broad question. Is there any kind of water quality, like? So in the specific instance that I'm thinking of, we have 2 college campuses here. So this all kind of relates to common plan of development and water quality volume treatment requirements. So like, for instance, St. Olaf, it's been around since long before Clean Water Act came into play, have, an extremely large amount of impervious surface that was, essentially a lot of that didn't get treated, but because it was constructed prior to Clean Water Act. So my question is, under like common plan stuff. So if they have a project that's coming in, it's over an acre, but they're not, so they, meet the requirements for the construction stormwater permit, but say they're only adding a half acre of impervious surface. Under common plan, are they required to essentially treat that?
Yeah, in any instance where they're gonna add new or fully reconstruct an acre or more, they would be expected to meet that. So if they're only adding new, having a new, but if they're also fully reconstructed, again meeting that definition of fully reconstructed, they would be expected. If it's acre or greater of new and fully reconstructed, they would be expected to meet the MS4 requirements.
I more mean when, like, so if they're only adding a half acre of impervious, but the construction project is over an acre of size for land disturbance, but they're only adding a half acre of impervious. But since they already have, over or X amount of acres of created impervious on site, would they be expected to essentially treat for their new impervious?
I think I understand now. Yeah, you're saying under common plan. Mike or Todd, do you have any thoughts about that? Sounds like a college campus where they're basically, it seems like a college campus scenario would, maybe you could say everything falls under common plan, but I don't know if we view it that way.
Yeah, this is Mike Findorf. You really have to have, for a common plan, it all show up on one set of plans. So just because you're a college campus and you're going to be, building off and on over the next 5 years, it would really be a common plan if you show this is like phase 1 of your parking lot work and phase 2 starts next spring, and it all shows up originally on one set of plans. Otherwise, if it's just kind of a one-off project, and it's less than an acre of new impervious surface, you're not reconstructing any impervious surface, you wouldn't have to provide treatment.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. let's see. Another question in the chat. Noah Check asked, does the MPC have any additional guidance for fully reconstructed definition? Specifically, what constitutes exposing the underlying soils beneath the structure pavement? Past webinars showed some visual examples. Are those on the stormwater manual site? Todd, do you by chance have a diagram available of fully reconstructed?
Yeah, I do. I could pop that up here, I think.
Yeah, maybe if you have it available, you could share it. And I think we have like a really good example.
Yeah, nothing has changed on this. I know we offered guidance in the past, so we're still going with that. Let's see here. Is this working?
Yep, we can see it, Todd.
Yeah, this was the graphic we had used in the past to try and describe this, and this is for a road project. So, I mean, this is your typical road. You've got some base and sub-base. There might be 2 or 3 layers of that or more with concrete on the top, and then you have the native underlying soils underneath. And that is the line that we're looking at. If you're exposing those underlying soils. So if you want to rehabilitate the pavement, and if you want to do some rehabilitation to the base, you can do that, and it's not considered construction activity. It's when you expose those underlying soils. I think this is pretty clear for your typical highway reconstruction. It does get a little bit more foggy if the road's being raised or lowered, you know, by 10 feet or something. I guess one could claim that you're not disturbing the underlying soils if you're just adding more to it. But for those major type projects where it's a whole new profile of the road, we would be expecting you to consider that fully reconstructed. The other example that has come up over the years is, it doesn't have to be a road project. Think of a commercial building, a large slab on grade sort of project, where you just have a huge concrete slab and it's right on the underlying soils. There's a building on top of it. If the proposal was to come in and tear that building down and rebuild a commercial building and not tear up the concrete base, we again would consider that not fully reconstructed, since you're not exposing those soils. So I think those are the main examples I can think of. I don't know if anybody has any other specific questions in regards to a specific project.
Thanks for
And
that,
I'm
Todd.
sure there's also some situations out there I'm sure that we've never heard of, and we always recommend or have available to you to give us a call and we can talk through it and see if we can figure out what makes sense.
Yeah, and this diagram is available in the response to comments to the 2020 MS4 general permit, which is available through our PCA MS4 website. If you go to the 2020 permit page, you scroll down, there should be a response to comments document there, and you can find this diagram of the linear redevelopment. Let's go to an email question quick. So Jane Byron, City Rosemount, asked a question regarding if there is an existing regional treatment facility that already includes the requisite infiltration capacity and the project drains to it, are we covered? Our requirements are more stringent and require a greater infiltration volume than those listed in the 2020 MS4 permit, so we often have the requisite treatment capacity prior to road construction and other projects. There doesn't seem to be an off-ramp in the flowchart for the situation where you're already providing an equal or greater level of treatment prior to construction of the project. So this question, it really depends. The permit requires that you always explore on-site treatment, on-site volume reduction practices as the first consideration. You know, the goal is to try and mimic natural hydrology. And due to infiltration prohibitions, or maybe you make a cost effectiveness determination, you may determine that the existing regional treatment facility is appropriate. One of the things you might want to ask yourself, you know, is the regional treatment facility, is it right next to the project, adjacent to the project? Is it 2 miles away? The idea is that you're following that mitigation preference sequence in item 2011. So It depends. You're gonna have to look. You're always gonna have to first explore on-site treatment practices before moving to, those existing regional practices. We'll go to another chat question. John Anderson asked if we have a business park constructed in 2005, streets and utilities, but not individual sites, and the stormwater system had a regional pond to construct it to serve the entire development based on requirements at the time, how would individual site build out be looked at now since treatment requirements have changed since 2005? Yeah, that's similar to the previous question, in that you're always expected to first explore on-site volume reduction practices. Even if you do have an existing practice, we ask that you still first consider on-site volume reduction practices before moving to a non-volume reduction practice or regional treatment systems. So the idea is maybe you only get part of your water quality volume through that device, but before using that existing regional treatment practice, but you're always trying to at least explore that option first before assuming going to or utilizing that existing regional treatment practice. Megan Litzy asked, can you provide some examples of training that would meet the requirement of 2018? For that one, that's probably going to be your typical U of M training for, the one for site plan reviews. For those that conduct enforcement, it's probably going to be more of an in-house thing. You're probably going to have your staff that do enforcement make sure that they're reviewing what your regulatory mechanism requires, what your enforcement response procedures are. You might have to consult with your legal counsel to figure out what your legal authority is and what your enforcement capabilities are. But yeah, anyone that's conducting enforcement or site plans should have some commensurate level of training, and it might be in-house. Enforcement response is probably going to be tailored towards your individual organization. Nicholas Cantero, does the MPC have any plans to develop, update model ordinance language for MCM 5? Yep, that is underway. We have a draft that's basically complete. It's undergoing some final revisions. Our hope is that this winter we'll make that available. So it'll cover MCMs 4 and 5, and it'll have model ordinance language that MS4 pernies are welcome to look at and use. And yeah, that should again be ready in the near future. Mitchell Robinson has a question. 2 questions related to 20.7 for linear projects. Is there a definition example for when a reasonable attempt to obtain additional right-of-way easements for treatment for projects currently designed for 2022 construction? Would this requirement apply? Right-of-way acquisition can be a lengthy process that was not considered for this project. Yeah, so there is that off-ramp for maximizing treatment. Obviously, if you're too far along in the process design of a linear project where you're not going to be able to acquire additional right-of-way for treatment, you are allowed that maximize off-ramp. So you're going to try and do the best you can within your existing right-of-way, and at that point, you're going to call it good. If you're too far along in the design process where it's just not going to be feasible, then those projects that are planned in the next year or two, you're going to maximize. You're going to do the best you can with what space you have available. Todd or Mike, do you guys have any thoughts about the reasonable attempt? I think this is a provision 2 in the CSW. Do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, we had this question during the public comment period, so there's a lengthy response in the response to comments, but basically what we're looking for is we're not asking people to use eminent domain, condemn a structure. We're looking for those places where there is land available. It's not in any other use right now. For example, it's not an apple orchard and you want to take a couple of acres of somebody's productive apple orchard. It's land that's available, that you have made the attempt, you've documented the attempt to get it. There's a lot of situations where you're going to be right down downtown. There's going to be structures on both sides of the road. There just isn't going to be much available. But a reasonable attempt is just showing that you looked through the corridor, you identified a space that was available, and then you attempted to get it. You've contacted the parties, and that you've documented your attempts.
Thanks, Mike. Randy Neprash has a question. Has the MPCA's MS4 digital document library been updated with new materials that align with the new MS4 general permit? No, not yet. That is, like I had mentioned, a goal is to get those updated as we find more materials, and those get developed over time, especially as we find materials and we get the blessing from MS4s to share them with folks. But not yet. That is something we're working on, and we are continually putting new materials on the MS4 digital document library and the MS4 toolkit with the goal of trying to align with the 2020 MS4 permit. Randy, you got another question. If a sufficient regional treatment BMP is in place, can its capacity be used to meet the requirements for new project within its drainage area? Can we consider this a cost consideration? I'd read that. If a sufficient regional BMPs are in capacity to be used to meet the requirement. Yeah, there might be a situation, and Mike or Todd, feel free to jump in here. There might be situations where you're using, if it was a properly designed regional system, after, again, first exploring on-site volume reduction practices, you might make the determination in the end based on cost effectiveness that a capacity, that it is an appropriate BMP to meet the MCM5 requirements.
Cole, this is Todd here. I think that's a pretty good answer. If the BMP in question is meeting the permit requirements, I think we would allow that. I guess the common situation or problem I see people run into is when infiltration is appropriate on the site and it is an option for you, but there's a regional wet sedimentation basin next door. In those situations, we'd want you to explore volume reduction on site, since that pond itself is not meeting the permit requirements. If your site was all high groundwater and there was no option to do infiltration on the site, then the pond does meet the permit requirements, so you'd be able to use that.
Thanks, Todd. Nicholas Cantaro has another question. I've received questions about standalone trail projects, not part of a street project, that would trigger the 1 acre impervious threshold. Previously, some cities and watersheds had blanket exemptions for trails in their ordinance code. I saw a comment during the draft permit that these projects would require treatment, but there is flexibility there. Can you speak more on this? Yeah, so again, our threshold is at 1 acre or more of new and fully impervious surface, and it sounds like that would trigger it. Again, though, I think we would view that as a linear project, so you're going to do your best to obtain additional right-of-way, obtain easement or permission to get some more treatment to meet that inch or half-inch requirement. And similar to like a road project, we would view, I think, trails as a linear project. And you would be expected, in the event you can't meet the full treatment requirements, to maximize, to do the best you can with the scenario in mind. Did you have anything, Todd? Sorry, I heard something go off.
Well, maybe I'll add a little something. We've worked with these trail projects quite a bit over the years. We have gotten creative with how we require treatment on those by focusing on parking areas, by focusing on areas where the stream or the path is crossing a stream or is it adjacent to wetlands. But otherwise, yeah, trails going through a forested area, it's not a huge water quality concern. We understand that. And we have entertained the idea of having an exception for trails in our construction permit. I'm sure we'll discuss that again in this round. So we have had some flexibility on these projects, and it's like Cole said, you are required to maximize. So there's that flexibility built in. If you've got one of these projects, and it does get tricky when it's a really long trail because that impervious surface will add up as you go along. I guess I would recommend to the consultants and the cities, you can always give us a call and we can try and show you some of the things that we've done in the past.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Yeah, I'll just reiterate that if you're in doubt or you have questions, yeah, feel free to reach out to MS4 staff, or if they're more technical, obviously feel free to reach out to the engineers, Todd or Mike, if you have questions about a scenario in mind, and they'll work with you to see what options you might have available. Randy has a question. MCSC, or comment, looks like rather. MCSC got a chance to look at and comment on the model ordinance language that MPCA has developed. We appreciate that opportunity. Yeah, I'm glad you were able to take a look at that and get some feedback. And you also commented, Randy, always nice to hear from Mike Findorf. Agreed.
Thanks,
John Anderson has another question. Are cities expected to review plans and issue permits for MCM5 and other governmental agencies up the food chain, such as counties and MnDOT, for work within our jurisdiction? Dwayne, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can take. Yeah, this is Dwayne, supervisor of the MS4 program. So, we've actually had that question before, and the answer to this depends on two things. Number one, you have to consider where the latest decennial census urbanized area is, because counties and MnDOT are only regulated in the urbanized area as defined by the census. So if we are talking about a city in rural Minnesota somewhere where there is no urbanized area, and one of these road authorities traverses through your city, that means that the road authority is not regulated under the MS4 permit there. And so the expectation is, and the permit says it, is that to the extent allowable under local law, the city must provide regulatory oversight of all construction projects of over an acre. And so that is the expectation. Now it's going to come down to, probably some discussions between the road authority and the city. And at this point in time, we are going to allow those conversations to happen. If the city ultimately determines that they don't have the legal authority to regulate, say, a MnDOT or a county within their jurisdiction, then that needs to be documented. You need to be able to demonstrate that that has been the determination, the legal determination at the local level. And we're probably going to recognize that. If one of these road authorities is traversing through your city and the area in question is within the urbanized area as defined by the census, that means these road authorities are a regulated MS4 themselves, and the permit will tell you that as a city, you are not obligated to provide regulatory oversight of another NPDES permitted entity. So that would be the MPCA's authority, and we would be responsible for that. So I hope that answers your question. If it does not, because that's an important one to understand. If it does not answer your question, click your mute off here and let me know.
I've got a question on this is Greg from the city of Little Falls. Our city limits do not extend all the way out to our urbanized area. So does that mean that like the county and the state outside of the city limits, that they would be regulated underneath the same MS4 because it's outside of the city limits, or how does that work?
All right, so Little Falls. Geez, I got to look at a map. I think you are in a place in Minnesota where there is zero urbanized area as defined by the census. Cole or Carly, I don't know. Can you quickly confirm that? I don't know. I'm assuming that there is no urbanized area that overlies your city. Therefore, if that is true, then MnDOT or the county is not regulated there at all. So what that means is we would expect the city of Little Falls to provide regulatory oversight of construction activity within your city to the extent allowable under your local law. Did that answer your question?
Not really. I know we do have an urbanized area based on the census data because we've looked at it.
Okay. So where there is urbanized area and a road authority has a construction project, the city is not required to provide oversight in that area. But once the road project leaves the urbanized area, the expectation is that you do to the extent allowable.
Okay, thank you.
I'm looking at the MS4 mapping tool, and that's got the 2010 urbanized areas based on the U.S. Census, and I don't see any urbanized area in Little Falls. Maybe that'll change if the 2020 census data becomes available, but I don't see any currently.
I even doubt that the 2020 census. So, do we all understand, what the urbanized area as defined by the latest census means? And if you do go on our MS4 mapping tool, that is the gospel of where urbanized area is in the state of Minnesota, and it has implications. I think that some definitions of urbanized area vary out there by, there's a lot of folks that perceive it to be different than what it really is, but that's how we identify who's regulated and who isn't. We completely rely and depend on the maps given to us by the U.S. Census Bureau to determine where the technical urbanized area is. And I think Cole is correct that the last I looked, and based on the location of Little Falls, there is no urbanized area out there as defined by the census. So, Greg, does that make any sense to you?
It does. I'll have to look to see at where our urbanized, because we looked at a map before that had it. So I'll look at this in the future to see where our urbanized area is and is not. So thank you.
Yeah, and if there's confusion on that, give us a call. We'll look at it together and we'll figure it out.
Dwayne, this is Randy. One of the features of the urbanized areas, according by the census definition, is there has to be an urban core in the middle of the urbanized area of at least 50,000 people. So I don't think there's any way that there's a census urbanized area around Little Falls.
I would agree.
Correct. We're only at about 9.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. And yeah, I was just going to comment that, so I have the MS4 mapping tool open right now. It's available on our website, but the urbanized area is really going to be around your larger metropolitan areas. So the urbanized area, if you can see my screen, is this kind of the purplish pink here. It's going to be around in your dense parts of the Twin Cities metro, St. Cloud, your Duluth, your Rochesters. You're going to see this dashed purple line or the fully purple pink line filling that indicates that it's urbanized area. And yeah, Little Falls, you're far enough outside of a metro, a larger city that you wouldn't fall within the urbanized area. So recommend checking out this mapping tool.
Greg, I would venture to guess that 50 years from now, there will not be urbanized area out there unless the population just explodes.
I think you're right.
Yeah, the nearest urbanized area to you is St. Cloud.
All right. Thanks for that. I'm going to go to another email question. Jane had asked, our treatment volumes are more stringent than those listed in the 2020 MS4 permit. We require NERP level pretreatment, storage of the 100-year event on site, and infiltration of 1 inch over the entire site, not just the impervious. We also require infiltration testing confirmation post-construction. As the majority of the city does not have an outlet to a major river system, these more stringent requirements are one of the ways we build resiliency into our system. Are we allowed to keep these more stringent requirements? Yeah, and that's a yes. You may keep more stringent requirements. The 2020 permit is meant to set basically the baseline or the minimum requirements. So if you have more stringent standards, you are allowed to keep those as you see fit. We will go back to the chat here. Let's see. So Greg Kimman had a question: with the MPDS permit listing both owner, MS4, and contractor in the permit, does the MPCA view the MS4 entity as a partner in permitting or permittee pertaining to violations? That seems like it might be a little bit more. So it sounds like if you're the owner of a project, yeah, you would both be viewed as, you know, I guess in the event of a violation, if there's a CSW violation, I think we owners and contractors are both viewed as responsible parties. In the event of an MS4 permit violation, it would always be between the MPCA and the MS4 permit holder. Brian, if you're on the call, you might, if you want to say anything about as far as CSW side of things for projects about owner operator, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I can add to this because we have this discussion a lot in audits when we are dealing with MS4 owned projects, and the MS4 basically plays both parties. You have an obligation to meet the construction stormwater requirements because you're the owner of the project, but you also have an obligation as an MS4 to implement your own regulations and make sure that those are being followed as well. And so in essence, you're regulating yourself and the contractor that you're working with. So yet you have two obligations there. You have one as the permittee of the permit, or the owner of the permit, and then you also have your obligations under the MS4 permit to make sure that everything is being met at your local level.
The challenges that we run into, this is Greg, being a municipality, you have the lowest responsible bidder, so you don't always get to choose the best contractor for the project. You get what's dealt to you. You know, as you're aware, the MS4 and the NPDS has timelines in terms of erosion control and whatnot. And with contracts being performance-based, you really don't have the luxury to be able to direct their work either. And so it's a challenge when you tell them, put in the protection on there, and they continue not to. Are you still on the hook for a violation, even though you repeatedly told them to do something if a violation comes down from the MPCA?
Yes, and when we talk with folks, and this isn't specific to you know, an MS4 owned project, this is what we tell every owner of a project. If your contractor doesn't do the work, you still have an obligation to make sure that the permit is being met, whether that means finding them, making them do it, hiring somebody else, doing it yourself. You have to still meet the permit requirements. So that's not MS4 specific. We tell every owner that.
All right, thanks, Brian. Going to the next question here, Nicholas Quintaro. Heard some confusion on when the new MCM5 requirements must be implemented. Can you confirm that it's 12 months from the individual city permit issuance date and not the general permit issuance date? Yep, Nico, that is the requirement. It is based on when you were issued coverage under the MS4 general permit. It's not based on the actual date on the front cover of the MS4 general permit itself. So it sounds like, you know, majority of our permittees now have coverage probably somewhere between this summer and fall, and it's based on 12 months from that date that they got that on their notice of coverage. So we issue what's called a notice of coverage, which is basically the MS4 general permit with just the permittee's name on the front cover and when they were issued coverage, and it's based 12 months. They have to comply with the new requirements within 12 months from that date. The next question is from the city of Austin. What options are available for on-site volume reduction for street construction in residential or downtown area? Todd or Mike, do you want to comment on that?
This is Mike. I can jump in. You know, you're limited depending on what your downtown area is set up like. You know, your street width, where your pipes are, your utilities. But we've seen projects that used linear tree trenches. So you have basically planted some trees, along your right of way, but they're connected by a trench. There's various methods to do it, but they can get, relatively good volume reduction in the trench itself. I've seen along University Avenue, I think they were able to meet the full 1-inch volume reduction requirement with a few hundred trees connected in a tree trench. Rain gardens, there's water reuse. If you can find a way where you can get a cistern somewhere and, capture the water and then reuse it, some sort of landscaping, watering, irrigation. But you're pretty tough when you're in, in a residential or definitely in a downtown area. It's pretty tough.
Thanks, Mike. Patrick Sikora, sorry if anyone I'm butchering any of your names along the way as I read these, but Patrick has a question with regards to the stand-alone trails. Can a MIDS calculator for disconnected impervious or side swale be used to show infiltration volume compliance? Mike or Todd, I'll defer to you on that one.
The way that the permit is written right now, the answer is no. We don't have any sort of exception for that. However, that type of thing, basically exactly what you just proposed there, is something that we might be considering in the next permit. And again, these standalone trails where there's nothing else happening other than trail work, it's super difficult to fully meet the permit requirements the way they're written. I just highly recommend you give us a call. I hesitate to say this out loud too much, but in some cases we have actually let people do off-site treatment for impervious areas that are nearby, be it an approach road or something that's already existing. We have done that on occasion, which is kind of stepping out of bounds of what how the permit is worded. So we have tried to work with people with these trail projects as the years have gone by. And you're right, occasionally it is really tricky, and we are considering some type of exemption or exception or a different sort of approach for those types of impervious surfaces.
Yep, I would jump in too to say that we've been very creative. We've looked at, putting the treatment, I think Todd said earlier, near where parking areas are, trailheads, using natural depressions, just adding up, if you're in a forested area or some sort of meadow area where you can show that there's a natural depression that has good infiltration characteristics, to add up. And then also, this permit is flexible on linear projects, and you end up with that maximized, that you explored all of the things you can do and you've maximized your treatment. So I'll just second Todd saying, give us a call if you had a tough project.
What we haven't done is had people build an infiltration trench along the entire length of the trail. I mean, nobody's been doing that. We're not having people do crazy stuff like that.
All right, thank you both. Eric Francis has a question. Can you expand on what level of detail you'd like to see in the annual assessment? So the annual assessment itself, for when you're reviewing your program, you should really just be sitting down, reviewing your materials, your written procedures, and making sure that they align with the permit requirements, making sure they fit your local program. Do they match what you actually do and carry out? So I would say, reviewing your ordinances or reviewing your legal mechanisms for those long-term maintenance agreements. Just taking some time to reflect and look for areas to improve. As far as documentation for the annual assessment, if you decide you need, as a result of your annual assessment, need to make a change. Let's say you're going, you know what, wow, we're really missing out. We don't quite meet the standard for linear projects for the water quality treatment volume. That's something we want you to document as part of your annual assessment. We're in the process and we're exploring updating our ordinance, or you make a change to your written procedures for site plan reviews. You find out, well, that's not really match up with what we actually do now. When we originally came up with these written procedures, we did it that way, but now 2 years later, or a year later, we've changed how we do things. Take some time to document what kind of changes you're going to make and any modifications you make to your program. If you don't make changes, there's really nothing to document. We're all about, when you make changes, that's what you need to keep record of. Let's see, Randy had a comment. In order for urbanized area to be defined, there has to be an urban core of at least 50,000 people. Okay, yeah, we covered that earlier. So Randy, you had a comment. Please discuss and emphasize the important documentation in the eyes of the MPCA. Yeah, so documentation, as much as I'm sure folks listening, hate to have to do it, we do have to have, a level of accountability implementing this permit. So we need to see certain things to verify, as part of an audit, for example, to see that you're doing what the permit requires. So there might be some things, again, where you might not see a lot of value in it, but we need to make sure we're, implementing as the permitting authority, keeping you accountable for different permit requirements. We do think there is value in documentation for yourself as well. In the event, let's say, of an enforcement action where you need to elevate, where you've had repeated non-compliance, maybe an ongoing illicit discharge, or you're really having a tough time with a contractor getting compliance with your ordinance. That's really going to aid you to be able to provide that documentation, because in the event you need to go to court or defend yourself about why you're doing what you chose, the enforcement tool that you did, you have that record, you have that documentation to show here's the things we tried, here's what we did, and this is why we went the route we did. So we think that's kind of invaluable as far as, especially related to enforcement. And I guess I will throw this in there too. The EPA is starting to ask for more and more information. Starting in 2025, they are going to be collecting. They have an e-reporting rule, and they want to collect information from permitting authorities related to information submitted through the annual report. So they are interested in our permit requirements and what permittees themselves are reporting on, and so there is a level too that kind of our regulators are also asking for more information too. So we have a couple more. That's kind of the end of the chat questions right now. We have a couple more from email. Jane had asked, do we have to adopt the same thresholds for a permit requiring post-construction stormwater management if our existing regulations result in an equal or greater level of treatment? For example, some communities may require installation of stormwater treatment for any development or project requiring a new plat. That may miss some projects where there is an acre or more of fully reconstructed impervious, but generally include projects that are smaller in size. If the end result is an equal or greater amount of stormwater treatment overall for the community, are we required to change our thresholds to match those in the MS4 permit? Yeah, so the straightforward answer is yes, we would expect you to update your requirements. So the permit does require that all projects where the sum of the new and fully reconstructed impervious surface is an acre or more. That's when the MCM 5 requirements apply. So in this scenario, even though you might you might be going above and beyond in some instances, we would still expect that you would change your threshold to match or exceed that 1+ acre threshold of new or fully reconstructed impervious surface. And then we had one more email question from Jane. What about projects where an acre or more of impervious surface is being fully reconstructed, but the project is reducing impervious surface and there is already an existing BMP providing treatment equal to an acre or greater than 1 inch over the impervious surface? Do those projects still have to install additional treatment? And you noted that you have run into the scenario. Yeah, so the permit does again require on-site volume reduction practices as the first consideration. So in this example, if the existing treatment practice is a pond, for example, the permit would require that you first consider again on-site volume reduction practices before considering other options, including non-volume reduction practices like a pond. So you would still need to explore that as an option. But again, in the end, you might make a determination that the existing BMP is appropriate. Maybe it's based on infiltration prohibitions, or it's based on a cost effectiveness determination. But again, we do ask that you always first explore on-site volume reduction practices first. All right, I think that was the last of the email questions. Has anyone got their hand up? Can't quite see the whole list.
Hey, Cole, this is Todd here again.
Go ahead.
Can I jump in on one of the old previous question that we had? I've been thinking about this since you gave the answer. I think it came from John Anderson. He was asking about these projects that have been started in the past under a previous construction stormwater permit and MS4 permit, and they're still ongoing today. Do you remember that question?
Yes, I do now that you bring it up. Yep.
Yeah, so we have been allowing people to finish those projects. I think the specific example said it started in 2005, and it's still an ongoing project today, we'll say. If you started it in 2005 and you built a treatment system that met the permit requirements at the time, back in 2005, and this is still permitted and it's still ongoing, even though some of these lots have probably sat there with nothing happening on them, we are allowing people to finish those projects with the system that was designed in 2005. And I think you answered that a little bit differently than that, and I just wanted to circle back to that. And I know what we did. Each time we've had a new construction permit, we've told people to either finish the project or update the erosion control requirements if they've changed in your SWIP for these ongoing projects. But we have specifically told people that they don't need to update the permanent stormwater treatment system, and that they're allowed to finish construction just using that original pond that they had out there. And I think, I don't know if I missed your answer, part of your answer, Cole, but I think you misanswered that one. And I just wanted to circle back to that.
No, I'm glad you did. Yeah, if I said something that it doesn't quite align with how we've viewed things in our policy, then yeah, that I appreciate that clarification. Hopefully John's still here and heard that clarification.
Yeah, we were pretty specific about that in the construction stormwater world. I don't think that goes crossways with the MS4 world. I don't think.
I don't think so either. I mean, again, I think I answered a little differently. Again, it could be one of those things that comes down to a cost consideration too under the new permit. So they may still, in the end, it may not have been what we expected in the new permit, but in the end, they may have gotten there anyways with that existing treatment device had it been in compliance with the permit back then. But I appreciate that clarification, Todd. That it sounds like we are accepting things that if it's part of a common plan or part of a project that was started in 2005, and they at that time had the appropriate treatment device, we are accepting that. Hopefully I didn't.
Yeah, it just kind of struck me the way the question was worded, that there's a specific plan. You showed the whole development, showed the pond back in 2005, you got it approved, it met the permit at the time. We would allow you to finish that project. There are certainly some scenarios we've come across over the years where it's a little bit questionable what that regional pond was built for. Often there's a big pond in the area. It may or may not have been part of a future plan. So there are some gray areas out there. It's just the way that I think it was John worded that question. If it was all one common plan at the beginning and it was all on one sheet of paper, we would allow you to finish that project without making any changes.
Okay, thanks again, Todd, for clarifying that.
And this is Brian Green. So just something for MS4s and the record keeping part of that with that scenario. When we go out to construction sites and do our inspections, and there are these common plan developments that have taken years to develop, and they're using a system that was designed prior to the current permit, we do ask for those designs from the original plan to verify that everything that is being built was accounted for under those original plans. So that's just something for you guys to keep in mind if you're going to use those existing systems that were previously approved. Just make sure you have all the documentation to support that.
Thanks, Brian. Does anyone else? I'm not seeing hands anyways. Carly, do you want to maybe go ahead and, while we still have most people here, kind of our final Mentimeter and gather feedback from today?
Yeah, I can do that. So I did just repost the link to the Mentimeter survey in the chat, and then I will start presenting my screen here in a second. All right, so hopefully everybody can see my screen here. So I'm going to move on to the next question. So what is the status of your post-construction stormwater management regulatory mechanism to meet the 2020 MS4 permit requirements? Give everyone probably a minute or so to answer. Obviously, there's no right or wrong answer here. We're just trying to gauge where folks are at in this process. All right, I think I'm going to wrap it up here. Looks like we got people kind of all across the board, so that's good to know on our end. Thank you. All right, I'm going to move on to the next question here. Within your MS4 boundary, what % of construction projects over the last few years do you estimate have achieved full treatment on site? All right. Probably 30 more seconds. If you're answering, go for it. All right, great. Thank you. And if I'm advancing too fast, I think you still have the ability to answer and just move along with me. So our next question is, does your regulatory mechanism currently allow for an owner of construction activity to pay your organization for offsite treatment? Item 20.14 in the MS4 permit. And again, these questions are just kind of to gauge where everybody's at. There's no right or wrong answer, and this is all anonymous. So this just gives us an idea going forward. All right, I'm going to move on to the next question here. Considering the infiltration prohibitions, what is the estimated percentage of your MS4 jurisdiction that is suitable for stormwater infiltration? And I think this question is just really coming out of, everyone is spread around the state and everyone has different means for infiltration. So it's always interesting to see what everyone can and can't do. All right, great. I'm going to move on to the next question. I promise we should be almost done here. So this is going to be an open-ended question. What guidance or materials would you suggest be developed and made available by the MPCA related to today's topic? And if there's not enough space for you to elaborate in the text box that you have on your screen, feel free to send an email to the MS4 permit program inbox, and we can definitely look at that and see what we can create that would help you guys out. All right, and that's okay if no one has any suggestions. This is just a way for us to kind of gauge what we need to create going forward. Great, so it looks like we're getting some responses. This is awesome. All right, I think I'm gonna wrap it up here in about 30 seconds. All right, awesome. All right, you can continue to submit those if you want. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next question here. How helpful was the information provided in this outreach session? All right, I think I'm going to wrap it up here in like 30 seconds. And we really do appreciate all the feedback that you are providing us today. It helps us improve going forward. So thank you for taking the time to do this with me. All right, next question. I think we're almost done here. So this last one is an open-ended question. How can the MPCA improve future outreach sessions? So if you have any suggestions, feel free to put those in there for us. All right, doesn't look like I'm getting anything over here, which is fine. Oh, there we go. I got one. Call for comment. Email to remind the group to email questions ahead of time. Everything went well, thanks. Thank you, that's great to hear. We definitely took into your consideration some of the comments we got from the first outreach, and we were hoping everything was going to go as planned, so. All right. Well, thank you for your comments. I think I'm going to end that here. So if you have any other comments you want to, or questions, feel free to send those later on after today. But Cole, I'm going to turn it back to you.
All right, thanks, Carly, and thanks everybody for answering those questions. We really appreciate the feedback on this. So, I don't have much to add. We can stick around. PCA staff can stick around a little longer if anyone does want to stick around and ask some more questions. Other than that, we can kind of wrap things up here. Again, reminder, the next session will be Thursday, December 16th, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Anna Bush will be presenting on that, and I know she would appreciate, and I think we'll do that. I think we'll make a call to action to remind folks to submit questions ahead of time, because TMDLs can be tricky. So we would definitely appreciate anything if you know going into next month's session. Appreciate those up front. So again, we'll stick around for a little bit, but again, thank you everybody for attending today, and hopefully we'll see you next month.
Let's give it until 10:35, Cole, and then we'll wrap it up unless we have a bunch of questions going on.
All right, sounds good. I'll stick around till then.
Or by the looks of things, sooner. Cole, it looks like we could probably pull the plug.
All right, sounds good. We'll go ahead and end today's session. Thanks again, everybody, if you're still here.
Thanks.